series, or perhaps this might be your first time joining us. Either way, I want to say welcome and thank you so much for coming tonight and joining us on this gorgeous April evening. So we have a lot of great information to cover, and it's going to be a very informative and fun program. So thanks for jumping along. With us tonight, my co-host and comrade, Jonathan Mock. He is with the Natural Resources Service Conservation District, the district manager there, or the DC, the district conservationist there. Also, we have our two wonderful speakers, Jessica Miller. Hello, Jessica, with Holden Forest and Gardens. She's the community forester there. And we have our other speaker is Dan Castellucci. He's the owner and consulting forester with Frontier Woodlands. Did I forget the name? I think I forgot the name. Frontier Woodland Services. I apologize about that. Frontier Woodland Services, LLC. So thank you. And also we have our service forester for this neck of the woods, Mr. Luke Walters, works with Ohio Department of Natural Resources Division of Forestry. So I want to mention that this program is being recorded, and that will be something that will be available to us to be able to go back and revisit and to double check on some things and see if there might be any parts that we missed. So for an optimal Zoom experience, everyone is being muted tonight, and cameras are for the most part turned off, or that might be optional, but everyone will be muted, and our preferred way of asking questions is through the chat box. So Jonathan will be monitoring our questions through the chat. And if you're unfamiliar, most of us are by now, but just take your mouse, scroll to the bottom of your screen there, and you can see the option of the chat box, and you can send questions. The presenters will be answering questions at the end of their presentation. So Dan will be speaking, then he'll get to the questions. Jessica will be speaking, she'll get to hers, and then at the end, we'll have some questions open for everybody to ask at that point. So just keep that in mind. And also, you will be receiving some resources. You'll receive a follow-up email probably tomorrow with resources and the recording link, and also a feedback survey. And for those of you, we ask all of you to please fill out that feedback survey. Let us know your thoughts, your ideas about the program, and potentially any future programs. And by doing that, you will be entered to win a drawing of 2 complimentary tickets from Holden Forest and Gardens. And there are 2 sets of 2 tickets. So what a great time to get outside, explore the Arboretum, or they're also good for the Botanical Garden up in Cleveland. So yeah, that's definitely worth the effort of a very quick feedback to fill out for us. Thank you in advance for that. And before I turn it over to Dan, what would a Woodland Wednesdays be without a few jokes? So first, when is the only time that it might be appropriate to do a forest thinning at night? Anybody know? The answer is during a harvest moon. Oh, all right. Joke number 2, how did the landowner decide upon her objectives for the woodlands? She followed her heartwood. Ah. And finally, what was the forester's request at the barber shop? He'll take a selective cut. There you go, my friends. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to turn it over to Mr. Dan Castellucci. Take it away, Dan.
All right, thank you. I don't know how to follow that up, but I'll give it my best shot. 1 minute, we'll get I've got a PowerPoint presentation ready to go for us tonight. I say some magic words, abracadabra. Did that work? Is everybody seeing it?
Yeah.
Wonderful. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about um, Forestry 101. We're going to talk about the basics. As Gail said, I am Dan Castellucci, the one, the only, I think, I hope. And I am the owner and consulting forester for Frontier Woodland Services. Uh-oh. Is it moving?
Moving it, Dan.
There we go. Okay. So again, we're going to talk about. Give me 1 second. Let me try this again. I'm not able to see what I'm doing. That makes things difficult. There we go. There we go. Now we're ready. All right. I'm sorry about that. I'm just a dumb forester. I like to go play in the woods. The technology end of this is the hard part for me by far. But we're going to talk a little bit about Forestry 101, but we're going to talk about it as if we're really looking at Gardening 101. A lot of people really need to think about their forest lands more like they think about their gardens. Their gardens are simple. They're much more easy to understand, and it really helps a landowner just wrap their head around the complexities of a forest just by breaking it down as a garden. Remember, not everyone's going to do this the same. Not everybody's going to grow the same type of garden. Not everybody's going to grow the same type of plants. Some of us have vegetable gardens, others have flower gardens. Our forests are the same. Some of us have wildlife refuges, others have, more of a timber-based approach, and that's okay. But everybody gardens for a different reason. We have our forests for a different reason. I thought about this and I thought where to start. And really, we can start at planting. This is a picture of one of my gardens over the years, and you can't see it there real well, but those are brand new plants. That's not likely to be where you guys are today. If that is where you are, I'm sorry, that's not what we're going to cover. We're going to move on a little bit further. Is it harvest time? Again, that may be where some of you are, and that's a whole different topic about how to do a good timber harvest. Where most landowners really are is somewhere in the middle. You're ready, you're in the middle, you're dealing with plants that are well established, you're dealing with some of the problems that come with established plants, maybe pests, maybe weeds, maybe competition, and that's where you're really at. So we're going to start in the middle and pulling weeds. Boy, I am sorry. That is a terrible picture. That was one of the years we had all the flooding, 2 years ago maybe. Back garden's in poor repair. I just couldn't get in it, and that's okay. That's okay. That garden still made more than enough tomatoes and potatoes and everything we asked of it. It was just a little bit different challenge. Maybe some of your gardens look this way. Maybe some of your woods look this way. So we have to deal with the hand we're dealt, I guess. So pulling weeds. Everybody pulls weeds from their garden. But what about the woods? Do you go out in the woods and pull weeds? What are some weeds in the woods? This is a picture in a very mature forest where grapevines were the weed. They pulled several trees over into a big patch, and essentially they toppled them, and now they're the only thing that's growing dominant. They've arbored over the top of the treetops, and boy, is it a jungle. Grapevines can be one of our forest weeds. Grapevines are an easier one to control, but they are still something we need to pull from our gardens, pull from our forests. Invasive species. This is a big one for most landowners. And people say, what are invasive species? The best way to think about it is they're plants usually from other parts of the world that are introduced to this part of the world, this part of our country, and they then find that the competition is less, or they find a way around the competition. Most of them start early, so they leaf out before all of our native vegetation. Most of them also keep their leaves later. So they're cheating on both ends of the system. If you're in Geauga County today and you look around and you see green in the woods and you see green, it's one of about three things. We have trout lilies, we have ramps. Those are both native. We like those. And then the other green one is multiflora rose. It's the first one to leaf out. And it's an Asian pest that was brought here. And now we're just trying to get rid of it. Why do we want to get rid of these? A lot of times they'll choke out our native plants. They will establish in the understory of a forest or in an open field and prevent anybody else from growing there. The next couple are subjective. So we talk about forest weeds as poorly formed trees. This is a really cool poorly formed tree. It was 4 trees that grew into 2 trees that grew into 1. And above that crotch, it's still 20 inches. That's huge. In a lot of woods, that's not a weed. That's a conversation piece. I would leave that in my woods. If you're growing timber, though, that's not a very good timber tree. So poorly formed trees, crooked trees, multi-stemmed red maple in a lot of areas. Those are weeds that we want to get rid of. This is a really cool. I mean, there was no rot in this tree. It's something that you don't often see. Overmature trees. How many people have an old pasture that had 2 or 3 trees in it, and the cows went away? Grandpa sold the farm, the cows left, and that pasture grew up into a woods. Now you have things like this white oak that are growing in the middle of your forest, and suddenly you don't know what to do. Again, there's no one solution for this. If you're growing timber, or if you have other young white oaks in the vicinity, maybe this is a weed. Again, in my woods, this is the old grandpa tree, the landmark that everybody uses when they talk about the woods. Go past the giant white oak and turn left. That may be the directions they give you. So again, forest weeds. I guess maybe I should ask, does anybody know the difference between a weed and a wildflower? It's all about location. Weeds are where we don't want them. Wildflowers are where we can let them be. So dandelion is a weed if it's in my garden. If it's back in my pasture, it's a wildflower. If it's next to the beehive, it's a wildflower. So same thing with forestry. The overmature wolf trees like this white oak are both weeds and maybe wildflowers or wildlife trees. Diseased and rotten trees are another one. And again, this goes both ways. If we're trying to grow timber, if we're trying to grow a good, healthy forest, this is not the tree we want to grow. If we're trying to grow raccoons, well, this is a nice home for that little guy. We'll come back and talk a little bit about him later. But again, think about your forest in terms of what do we want to grow there. And if we're growing things that we don't want, maybe those are weeds. So how do we do things? Oops, I guess it is crowded. Time to thin. I planted my tomatoes too close together that year. This was probably mid-July, and before too long, you couldn't walk between them. They just took over the entire garden. This is a pine stand. These were white pines planted on probably a 6-foot spacing and never thinned. So the trees all struggled to survive. They grew up, and you've got tunnels through there, and 0 understory. So from a wildlife perspective, if you're not living in the crown up where it's green, there's really nothing for you in this forest. Early thinnings versus late. Um, this is where we can really spend a lot of time, and unfortunately, I don't have a lot of great slides to go with it, but a thinning in a young stand tends to be an expense. So if you're thinning in that woods on the left, it's probably going to cost you money just because the materials that you're cutting, the materials you're getting rid of, the weeds that you're pulling don't have enough value to pay for the work. How do we do that work? Those are things like crop tree release. So we decide that this is the best tree in this particular area. We're going to remove its competition. Crop tree release is a subject that we can cover in a whole hour and a half out in the woods another day. Cull tree removals is kind of the opposite. Crop tree release focuses on the best trees and removes their competition. Cull tree removal focuses on the worst trees. Obviously bad trees, obviously weeds. The other picture there shows a mature forest. And mature forests, when we thin those, we're talking about a profit. That can start as early as, say, year 50, year 70 in a forest lifespan. And just because we're doing a thinning doesn't mean we're going to lose all of our trees. We can do that very selectively. Thinning can be as few as 5 or 10 trees to the acre. Most of the time, it's closer to 10. Because at this point, we're selling, we're removing something that has a value. Now we're talking about a profit. This is a commercial thinning. And then, my favorite time, and this is my favorite time for both the forest and for the garden. I mean, what's better than going out to the garden and picking a ripe red tomato and just slicing it and having it on the plate that night, or fresh corn on the cob that you picked and husked yourself. I've got my kids love that time, and I love it. Maybe that's why I spend so much time in the garden in the summer and not much time in the shrubbery beds. I don't get to eat anything out of there. But in the woods, that's my favorite time too, because that's when we're taking the products. We're taking the usable part of the woods. We're making sure that we're leaving enough for the future. And really, if you go through and you do a thinning and you get a couple of trees wrong, that's not that big of a deal. If you go through and do a harvest and get a couple trees wrong, that can really change the dynamics of your forest. In the harvest, you've always got a landing. You've got a place where the timber is going to come up and be loaded on a truck. It's good to see and pay attention to the logs coming out of the harvest. Pay attention to how much damage there is in the trees that you're harvesting. Are there big holes in the butts? Were they starting to rot and go downhill? Was there a stain color to the logs? There's a lot that can be learned from the log piles. That first poplar, that was just a giant. That one still stands. He hasn't been harvested. He's in a nice, secure, safe place. Here's a dandy of a log. This is black walnut. This is the king of the crops right now. And that tree was probably a 30-inch tree, so the scale in the photo doesn't give justice. The logger actually paid a tree service to come in and top that tree. So you see all the limbs there at the base of the tree instead of where the tree landed. And as soon as that tree landed, you see the metal clips they put in the butt to prevent it from cracking any further. That was a big money tree on that particular sale. But if you also look at the center of it, that tree was starting to get rotten and go bad. So that's something you need to always be mindful of and keep an eye on. Pardon me, I'm going to get a little bit of my refreshments. I wasn't sure. Somebody's in charge of refreshments tonight. I don't remember who was going to be bringing that cart around, but if you don't get yours, let Jonathan Mock know. Again, that great big walnut tree, that was ripe. That was ready to go. It was his time. We've got another log pile. This one is not so high quality. That's a lot of pin oak there. Um, it's low quality wood, but by harvesting the pin oak, in this particular case, we were going to grow a lot better quality trees. We're going to grow healthy red maples and some red oak. And everything has to go in a truck. Look at those poplars, laying there nice and tall and straight. Um, Again, this is my favorite time. This is when, as a forester, I get to use all my knowledge, all my skills to help a landowner to really get the products out, but keep their woods intact so that they can maintain all their other goals. Oh boy, I think we're going to slow down here. Complications. We talk about things being simple and being a garden, but there are a lot of complications for a forest land that just aren't there for a garden. This is an old jerk system. It had a center point and jerk over in Pennsylvania. So they had these wires run through the woods that would actually run individual oil and gas wells all over this 100 acres. There must have been one every 2 to 3 acres. So they had one center point and a wire that ran everywhere. Also in this picture, you can imagine, they also had a gas line and an oil line that ran from this particular pump down to a centralized station. They had road systems in there, but they also had a creek. So, there's a lot of complications that don't affect a garden just in that one little picture. Big thing that affects a garden differently than the woods is time span and timing. Time span is how long does it take? If you're like me, you haven't put much of a garden in yet, and you anticipate to be eating it in the fall. That's a very different thing than planting a forest. If I were to go plant trees for a forest, the earliest I could expect to do harvesting the fruits of my labor in terms of the end product is 50 to 70 years. Now, that doesn't mean we don't get the other benefits throughout. Wildlife will be using them almost immediately. But in terms of just the timing of the whole, or the time span, of the whole project, it's very different to have 6 months versus 100 years. Timing is the other. Timing is very important with your garden. If you don't get out there and get the weeds pulled, they're going to take over. If you're not out there when the tomatoes are ripe, you've got a couple of weeks and those tomatoes are gone. Timing in the woods is different. It's a little bit slower. You've got a little bit more time. I said I have kids. I have 4 daughters. They all decide to get married in 1 year. I'm in big trouble. I will not have any funds to put towards working in my woods that year for sure. Maybe not the year before or after either. And that's okay. So if that's your scenario where you don't have the time or the funds to go through and do a big invasive species control program this year, well, waiting 2 or 3 years is not the end of the world. Your tomatoes aren't going to be rotten at that point. It might be a little bit more challenging to weed it, but it's still going to be there. And the same thing with a harvest. If you're at the end and it's time to do a harvest, maybe you need to think about your retirement plans. If retirement's 15 or 20 years off, maybe we need to do a harvest now that really focuses the growth on the good trees. So an improvement got now. If retirement's 2 years off, maybe we need to just hold off on the harvest until you're ready to realize that income. Rows and rows. Maybe I should go back a picture. You don't see many rows here. the trees in the woods are not like the trees in your garden, plants in your garden. They're not going to be in nice, neat rows. You won't have a row of white oak, a row of red oak, and a row of sugar maple. They'll be interspersed. You'll have trees scattered throughout your woods. If they were in rows, boy, that'd make it easy. It'd make it easy to get in and out of your woods because you just go between the rows. It would make it easy to say, okay, it's time to harvest white oak. Let's go harvest the row of white oak. But that's not what we have. And then rows, right of ways. Boy, that's a whole lot going on in that picture. That's a big gas line that went through one of my client's properties. And he owns both sides of that pipeline. Getting from one side to the other is now a challenge. And that was before the slip. Now that it's slipped, we were limited to crossing at the top or crossing at the bottom. Logging equipment has to take special precautions when crossing right-of-ways, sometimes to extreme measures you wouldn't imagine. We brought in mats, we brought in gravel. It's something to think about. Right-of-ways are a huge complication in managing your woods. This one, not even from beyond a harvest standpoint, the landowner had trails that crossed that right-of-way in 2 or 3 places. And because of that slip, he can no longer use that even with his side-by-side. It was pretty substantial. Multiple use. You know, how many people in here are just here for timber, just here for one specific thing? That's all I do with my woods is let it be there for squirrels. And that's fine if that is you, but that's not the typical. Most people are here with multiple things in mind. You know, we got the deer there. They'll go just about anywhere, so we don't have to worry too much about them. But maybe we need to do something to make it a little bit easier to hunt deer, or maybe they're missing something from their habitat, and that becomes one of the complications that we have to think about when managing our woods. Where is your woods? If your woods looks like this, you don't need to do much planting, do you? There's a lot of trees there. There's a lot of stems. You've got a lot of options if this is what your woods looks like. You can manage this for just about anything. On the other hand, if your woods looks like this, you better not be thinking about a harvest or a thinning or anything other than maybe replanting. You know, it's time to start over. You know, this is a typical portable sawmill cut. And this was the landing, so this is the worst that this site looks. But boy, that particular site's not going to grow good trees for a long, long time. I hope most of you don't have a woods that looks like this. But if you do, there's still things we can do to help improve it, make it better, hopefully get it towards your goals. But that's a lot of gardening. That might be akin to gardening on the moon. Let's see, goals. Oh my, you know, this is another one of those places where we could talk all day, and this is really the focus of Miss Jessica's presentation. So we're just going to hit some highlights here. You know, goals are different for every landowner. I work with landowners that have each and every one of these goals, and sometimes most of them at the same time. So we'll talk about goals, and then we'll talk about maybe a little bit about balance. But aesthetics. If you like aesthetics, if your main goal is to have a pretty woods, this is it. This is a fall picture, but boy, that's a nice open woods. You can see through it. You can walk through it. So aesthetics are there. Hiking's there. Maybe hunting's there. Maybe maple production. Maybe some mushrooms. Soil conservation. We hit just about everything there. Oh, don't mind him. You see that handsome guy there, and the human that harvested him. You know, so hunting, that's a big part of a lot of landowners' goals. They're into that big time. That's a main reason I see landowners interested in managing their woods is to grow him or his buddies. Oh, here we are, back to edibles. Um, I don't know if anybody's aware, but there's a lot of forest edibles out there, and I don't just mean these mushrooms. The one on the left is a chanterelle. That might be my favorite. Not because they taste better, but these things are orange and they grow in mid-July, so it's really easy to spot a patch of chanterelles all the way across the woods. Um, no problem to see them at 100 yards and go walk over and harvest a bucket load. On the right, we've got morels. They'll be popping, boy, with this weather. They might have popped yesterday. I don't know. It's close. It is really close for the morels. If you're south, you might be getting them already. North, look for the blacks soon. Timber harvests. That's a big goal, and that's a goal that a lot of landowners change their priority on as they go through the years. Even in young stands, I recommend that landowners always keep that in the back of their minds, that their woods is probably the third largest investment they own. You may have a pension plan, you may be relying on the value of your home, but the woods can really be a huge financial windfall for you if you manage it. And the more you manage, the bigger the windfall. So as landowners progress, timber harvest may move from a low priority to a high priority. And then wildlife in general. Boy, that poor little raccoon. It's fun when you get to sneak up on these guys, or when you're working in a woods and you notice a honeybee hive 40 feet up in a tree. It's just cool to see this stuff on a regular basis. Not so much fun when you run into the hornet's nest in the ground beneath the tree, but you take the good with the bad. So we've got all these goals. How do we balance it? I always like to compare it to this game I played as a child, and I had to go find it and buy it just so I could make my children play it now. But at the top, you see the blue piece on the top. It sits on a pedestal, and you have these tokens that you have to place around the board. And the goal is to place the tokens without toppling it. And it's just like our goals in the forest. So if we place a couple goals on there on one side, maybe this is firewood production. We load it up. We've got firewood production in green. We've got aesthetics in yellow. We've got wildlife habitat in purple, and maybe edibles in orange. So you load it up, and it starts to shift and move. And depending upon how far you push things, it changes that balance. And we have to start relying on it more for firewood production and more for firewood production. You see how it's getting tilted off its balance. It's ready to crash. And eventually, suddenly our woods is not doing what we wanted it to anymore. So balance is important. We've got to have balance in our woods, balance in our goals. And that's where the woods gets to be a lot more difficult than the garden. The garden's pretty simple. You get to make quick decisions that say, all right, I want 6 tomato plants this year, or I want 10. That's quick. That's easy. You get to change your mind again next year and say, oh, 6 was not enough. I better plant 10. Oops, 10's too many. I better plant 8. Those are things that make a woods more difficult than a garden. Good news is there is help. Help is available. We've got everybody's here tonight. So you've got your local soil and water office. You've got Gail and the rest of the staff there ready to help you get you pointed in the right direction, help host things like this. NRCS, both through education and through the EQIP program. So they offer a cost share to help fund some of this work. The ODNR Division of Forestry has service foresters for every county in the state. We have Luke Walters with us tonight. He's the service forester for Geauga County and surrounding. So they're there to help you, and they're not they're getting paid by federal or governmental funds to do these things. Recently, we've got Holden and some of the experimental stuff that they're doing up there, which that's what Jess is all about. I mean, she's got incredible work being done up there that's really reinforcing some of the forestry knowledge that we got in college. And then there's consulting foresters. You know, they play yet a different role in that, you know, the service foresters, the NRCS, they're limited. They can only spend so much time. They can only do so many things with individual landowners. Consulting foresters are paid for their time. That's how we make our living. Couple words of wisdom. There are no license or registration programs for consulting foresters in Ohio. So if someone says they're a licensed forester or a licensed registered forester for Ohio, they're lying. There is no state licensure, no program like that in Ohio. What you can look for is association with the Society of American Foresters, or look for a certified forester. Better yet, look for someone that's a member of the Association of Consulting Foresters. These are the professionals that have decided this is what they're going to do for their living, and they're really out there to do a good job and help you to manage your woods. The Ohio Society of American Foresters has a directory that lists all the foresters in the state. You can see the link there at www.osafdirectory.com. That's a good place to start. Maybe just hire that handsome guy there with the white oak tree too. You know, he'll help you out, I'm sure. My contact information. We'll leave this up here, and maybe we'll open the floor for questions. I don't know, maybe I went too fast or too slow.
I think timing was perfect. For anyone who missed the intro, if you have questions, just go ahead and type those into the chat and we'll get some of these experts to answer them for you. One that did come in, could you tell us how much that big walnut fetched in the sale?
I cannot say specifically. You know, the buyer paid for that tree along with a whole woods along with them. I can guess that was probably somewhere between a $5,000 and $8,000 tree. It came down very sound, very solid, and the buyers were very happy when it came down.
Well, great. I don't see any other questions right now, but Dan will be available after Jess goes. Oh, how about tips for managing or restoring ash trees?
Oh, ash is a tough one, mainly because with ash, we don't know what's going to happen after the ash borer. So we have the ash borer comes through and it eats everything that is, we'll say, 3 inches and bigger. It doesn't really kill the small trees because they are not enough food, and the borer knows that. So the female ash borer doesn't lay her eggs there. So then what happens is that we have little trees that continue growing, and as they grow up, they get large enough to become food source. So the thought of the ash borer eating itself out of house and home may not work. Now, eventually, we may find there are some ash trees out there that are resistant. So as we find resistant trees, we can really hope that those will be the future, not the trees, not all the small saplings that we see. They're just going to grow up and be future food. We really have to find some resistance. And until we find and are able to capture that resistance and nursery, raise it up through nursery stock, it's going to be tough to restore the ash.
Yeah, and I think they have found some resistance in certain species, and I believe Holden is now working on a project to try and work on some breeding to get those genetics out there. So, is there a minimum acreage you need to have a timber harvest?
There are some minimums in terms of, oh boy, that's tough. Anything less than 10 acres can be tough. It doesn't mean it's impossible. It means that it's tough. That means that you may have to take less in terms of monetary in order to get somebody out there. The problems are that the cost of moving equipment, the downtime of turning one project down, finishing one project and starting another project are the same, whether it's 1 acre or 100. So in order to overcome that cost, you really have to have some good timber on small acreage, or you have to be adjacent to another landowner that's hopefully doing a good harvest. If 2 or 3 landowners can band together and put together a harvest themselves or through a forester, that's a good way to get small acreage taken care of.
Okay, so as a new landowner of 40 acres, if I called you up and you came out to evaluate the land, what would I be getting? Most of the postcards they get are for harvesting timber, and they're not sure if their land is ready for that.
There's several things that I'm going to talk to you about if you call up. The main one is, what do you want to do with it? As a forester, I really have a hard time without knowing what you want. I can come through and put together a harvest plan, but if you don't want to do a harvest, then that's not going to help you. I can come through and put together a plan to grow more whitetail deer or bunnies, but if you're not into deer or bunnies, then that doesn't help you. So I really need to feed off of what it is you want out of the forest and what it is you want to get accomplished in order to tell you what to do with your land. Now, I will tell you, if you're in a position to do a harvest, what you can do. But my job is to tell you what your options are, not to necessarily push you to do something that you shouldn't.
Yeah, I think, Luke, if you could just expand upon kind of the importance of not just calling the postcard guy, but having somebody come out, whether that's you or Dan, and do it right.
Yeah, I was getting ready to do that. Thanks, Jonathan and Dan. But probably one of the first things, if you're a new landowner and you're looking to do management, and maybe you don't know where to start, it's a big woodland. You're not sure, maybe it's not real young, but maybe it's not real old, ready for a harvest. But there's a lot of in between there that you can do. A lot of different management. There's pre-commercial stuff that may cost, and a lot of different options. That's where the government comes in handy. And kind of like a free appraisal. You could call me. We'll set up an appointment. I'll come out and we'll walk in and discuss, okay, you can do this, this, and this, but maybe your property doesn't allow you for these other options, or maybe something you were looking for, or to even know what options you may have, just from what your land's presenting you. But when you get a postcard or just a simple thing in the mail saying, we want to come, you have timber you want to harvest, a lot of times those folks, they're just going on to an aerial photo. They see you have some woodland and they just want to send you a card, and probably in the hopes of that you're going to be, you may make the mistake and let them do it. They might be a bad actor, they might not. But if you don't know what you have, then them giving you a price, you have no idea what's going to happen. So that's a very easy way to get yourself into trouble, because once the trees are cut, it's real hard to glue them back on. So I haven't seen anyone do it yet. So want to make sure you're making the right decisions. So take your time. I'm not trying to take any work away from Dan either. We work very closely together with these folks, with their consulting foresters. Dan does a lot of great work for the area, very good conservationist. There's a few other ones in the area too. But, a lot of good folks, a lot of people that are going to help you. We're here to promote each other. So by all means, make sure that if you do want to do something, give me a call, give Dan a call a professional.
So someone asked, are you a consulting forester then?
I am not a promoted forester. I am a state service forester. So I'm paid by the government, paid by your guys' tax dollars to come out and give you the best advice that I can with my, with all the hot air up top here. So.
Do one of you or maybe Jess want to touch on the future of beech tree with the nematode and the beech leaf disease?
Ooh, that could be a whole other
Yeah.
workshop webinar. I can speak a little bit more from the science and forest ecology perspective. These guys can speak from the forestry and timber perspective for sure. What I can tell you is that we experienced it very much as the epicenter up here in Lake County and Holden. So for example, our oldest growth forest is in Stebbins Gulch area, and we have trees in there, beech in there that are 250, 300 years old or older. And some of them are completely defoliated and near death. We've also seen a lot of newly fallen trees. So the stress is enormous. And we've seen changes in the understory big time. So the forest is definitely responding. Having said that, we do know what it is. As the question referenced, it's a nematode, likely from Asia. And we are doing some research here on exactly how the mechanisms work. However, that's only one piece of the puzzle. It's possible there's another vector in the equation that's actually causing the leaves to have that striping and not be able to basically perform photosynthesis. So what we do know is it seems that water has to do with it because nematodes need water in order to squiggle up to the leaf bud, where they then remain until sometimes the buds actually break. Some of them you'll see the buds try to come out and then just drop. Unfortunately, that means that there's not necessarily an easy fix for forest grown beech because it rains and there's weather and these things spread. So we've had some experimental nematodicide work with Bartlett tree and also with the US Forest Service, just sort of throwing things at the wall, seeing what sticks. We do have some beech on our property that are meant for experimental purposes that were planted during the big scare about beech bark disease. So we're on it. We don't have any solutions yet. But fortunately, we actually just hired a forest health coordinator to work on both that and a lot of other pest and pathogen issues. So she's going to start hopefully generating a newsletter aimed at landowners. So that's something that if you're interested in, you could just email me and I could get you listed for that. But I know from a timber perspective, we did a harvest 2 years ago and a lot of the trees coming out were beech for this very reason. That we've been seeing the decline. So per Dan's slide on, you want to get trees before there's some rot in the middle, sort of like, well, we've seen the writing on the wall. Having said that, I'm an optimist. So yeah, let's hope that there's resistance out there and not go the way of the chestnut is sort of my opinion and harvest every single beech out there. But yeah, you guys can cover a little bit more of that from the forest.
Yeah, because someone's asking, should we go ahead and harvest these sooner if they do have it, and ways to identify it?
Well, in terms of harvest sooner, I guess it depends. You know, if you've got a forest that's nothing but beech, that's going to be tough. You're trading big beech for small beech. If you have a mixed forest and there's other things in there, by getting the beech out sooner, you may be able to prevent Mother Nature from playing survival of the fittest, choosing a beech tree to live only to have it die the next year. Beech is not a highly valued hardwood. It's used primarily for blocking, occasionally for hammer handles, wheelbarrow handles, but usually generally low value materials. So, you know, it's kind of a tough spot for the beech.
Yeah, it's hard to know what's going to happen. It's hard to predict, what the future is going to hold for our American beach. They may not have a lot of timber value, and they usually, a lot of times if we're looking with our goals as timber management and, long-lived and wildlife, a lot of times we favor the oak. However, the beech nut is a valuable food source too for our deer and turkey. But yeah, trying to figure out whether it's ready to harvest them or, what you should do. I'd say you need to get a professional opinion to take a look at the woods. Is the rest of it ready to harvest? If you just have a bunch of disease and dying beech, you may not get too many bids or too much interest in a sale. So you need to see what's going on and see what your options are. Every woodland's different. Everyone, just from goals, from what's there ecologically and what you want to do with it in the future. So they all got to be evaluated differently. And circling back real quick, there was a question on Ohio forest tax law. And since that's pretty much me, in this area, we don't require you that you have to cut a certain amount of trees every year, every couple of years. It depends on what your management plan says. And every 5 years, we try to do a reinspection period just to see where you are and what's needed. So whenever your inspection is up and coming, I'm sure we'll get a hold of you and we'll figure it out and we'll see what needs to go on. But there's no certain amount of trees, so that's no worries there. So
Someone asked what the cost is of having a professional forester come out and do a consultation.
yeah, I mean, if it's me, I'm free. There's no cost on my end to come out and give a boots on the ground thing. I don't know how the foresters charge. So
So it really depends on how far we have to come and really what it is you're looking for as a landowner. If you're thinking about doing a timber harvest, some foresters will charge nothing for that. If you're looking at property you don't yet own, most foresters do charge something. It kind of depends on where in the spectrum. A simple consultation is probably gonna cost you, maybe $100 to $200. Remember, you're getting a professional out there. Your plumber's going to charge you that much just to show up. And then back to the question about the tax programs. Luke answered for forest tax law, but we also have CAUV managed by the auditor's offices in each county. The best answer I can give you is that's between you and your forester. That's not something that the auditor should be forcing upon you. You're not required by any law to harvest every 5 years or 10 years. As the forester writing a lot of the plans, that's something that is a really personal decision. If you are the timber harvest needs to make sense both for the woods, but also for you as a landowner monetarily. You have to be ready to realize that income. And as long as your woods can continue without, I'll say, going backwards, if it's not actively falling down around your ears, I'm not going to force you to do a timber harvest.
Yeah, I guess that's a good time to kind of just do a little bit of a plug for, if you're to the point where you need a full-blown forest management plan for your property, Dan is somebody who can write that for you. There is funding available through NRCS also to hire a professional come out and do that service for you. So if you have questions about that, we'll post Luke Walter's phone number, give him a call, and he will be happy to answer them.
We're going to send out in the resources, and I think this is something that Dan mentioned, the OSAF directory that's newly minted of consulting foresters. So there's, a bunch of different people. If you're way out there in an area that these guys don't typically go to, lots of people you can call.
And I think that's all the questions we got.
Well, great timing, because I was just going to say that now is going to be Jessica's presentation. It's about to begin here, and Dan will be hanging out with us for the remainder of the program. So thank you so much for all that great information, Dan. And we're going to turn it over to Miss Jessica Miller.
Thanks, Gail. All right, and that's not a bad segue to, as we were able to cover a lot of the 101 aspects of forestry. So I'm going to do a couple technology things here and then start sharing my screen. And we'll get started. All right. So I'm going to be discussing a little bit about options objectives. Dan offers us a perspective of sort of layman's terms, forestry. So we're going to transition from that to actually brainstorming about what's right for each of you and some of that critical thinking. As he actually mentioned in response to one of the questions, the decisions are up to you. So if you are a new landowner or if you've just never thought of what management options you might have, the power is in your hands. So there are different ways to kind of get informed and figure out what your priorities might be before you bring a professional in. Basically, you don't have to be an expert. It's your land, and there are resources to help you manage the way you want it. So I'll be covering basics. If you have more in-depth questions, please drop them in the chat box. And here we go. So defining objectives and priorities is just a way to methodically examine your objectives and really define how to make the picture clearer when it comes to management decisions. These are all questions that you can ask yourself. And if I were doing this workshop in person, I would have everybody have a little notebook with them and actually be answering these questions, or we'd be having a dialogue. And some of this is kind of the existential stuff. Why is it that you own a woodland? What do you want from it now? And what do you hope for it in the future? And these are important questions to ask because they're basically the foundation for what you can then do with your woods. You don't want to wind up in a situation where you think, oh, well, I have a forest, maybe I should be harvesting right now, or maybe I should be doing X, Y, or Z. But and then once you do that, no one wants to wind up with something that they didn't intend or didn't actually want. So this is just a critical way to critically think about a few questions about your goals to get off on the right foot for management.
Yeah, real quick, Jessica, I just wanted to add in there that is like the number one thing, the first thing before we even start any type of management, or even before you call a forester. They can't give you assistance, they can't help you until you know what you want to do with the woods. Obviously, as a forester, I could come out and I could tell you everything that I'd like to do with it. As a hunter, as a deer hunter, it's a lot of different goals and things that I would do versus that you might have if it's just aesthetics, having nice trails. I want to grow wildflowers, or I want to grow mushrooms. A lot of different things there. So this is the number one step in managing the woodlands. Everything's right and everything's wrong depending on what your goals are. So
that's right. There's no wrong path to take. It's just what you want and defining that and owning that. The power is definitely in your hands. So yeah, for sure. And Luke, feel free to jump in at any point. So basically you don't have to know exactly how to do the management. You just need to know what you might want and why, and that'll help you as a starting point to talk to a professional. And we covered a little bit of this before, but woodland management can do a lot of different things, and a lot of those different things can overlap and they can balance each other out. Some aren't compatible, but for example, if you wanted to cash in on all of your trees right now, but you also wanted to attract and support songbirds, you probably don't want to do a cut that high grades your woodlands and expect to get both things. But a lot of cases you can have your cake and eat it too. Another couple questions to ask yourself are, what is your property currently used for and what you would like to use it for? This is just setting the broad priorities for your woods and helps you establish what's feasible and realistic based on what you have right now and how it's being used. But remember that you have so many options, and determining those priorities helps you see where you can most effectively spend your energy. And it helps you talk to a professional if you decide to have a forester out to your property. And it puts you in the seat of sort of that driver's seat of what you want. So in order to think a little bit more critically about this, we're gonna sort of co-hash it out and take a poll through Zoom to think through some of these ideas. I'm also going to drop a document in the chat box while the poll is going on. And this document is a worksheet that might really help you to iron out your priorities. So the rest of my presentation very much goes through that worksheet, but I'm going to go ahead and start this poll. It'll appear on your screen and it's all anonymous. So go ahead and click on the options that you most agree with. So I'm going to launch this first one. All right, so this first thing that we have here is about your current woodland use. So go ahead and click on the things that your forest is currently used for. This is an example. These are all questions that are important to ask yourself and to basically know and have in mind before you invite a forester to your property to check it out. So go ahead and participate in this poll. And then the second question is activities that you use the property for currently. And we'll just see what we have in this group. So as those answers are coming in, I'm also going to put the management document in the chat box. All right. All right, we're at 62% in the poll. So obviously there's a lot of things on this list. I didn't have everything on there. Already we have 22% respondents saying other. So I'm curious to see what other things forest is used for in this group. All right, so we're finishing up. I'm going to end polling and share those results with you. You should be able to see these poll results. So it looks like for most of our group, the woods are a part of your primary residence. This is an important thing to consider because whatever you're doing, obviously in those woods, you're going to be right next to it. You're going to be experiencing the direct results, whether that's aesthetically or whatnot. It looks like also we have a lot of people thinking in terms of investment and recreation. Just curious, if anybody wants to share, please feel welcome in the chat box, share what other things your forest is used for, just out of curiosity. And then, oh yeah, so walking or hiking is a high, wildlife observation is high, but also, yeah, a lot of bird watchers in this group, very cool. All right, and then we're gonna do one more poll here. This one's real short. Let me launch this for you. So in this question, we are thinking about our woodland goals. So in the future, what are you interested in? Maintaining forest health, generating income. So select everything in this poll that you, yes, everything that you're interested in. All right, and I see that someone replied that they own forest to maintain ecosystem. Another person replied that foraging, all right, that's awesome, is important for ramps, huckleberries, hickory bark, very cool. And another thing that's not listed on here, someone wants to make sure to plant for climate change so you don't lose the woods. Absolutely, forest and wildlife preserve. Excellent.
Just to tell you, I mean, that's why we're waiting for the poll, you know, on the climate change topic. One of the best things you can do is just actively manage and be a part of the woodland, controlling non-native invasive pests, you know, keeping the dead, diseased, and dying trees out of the woodlands. You know, even harvesting is a great way to manage the woodlands, just to keep it healthy and keep your trees growing at their best ecological and economical sense. So that's a good one though. That's one that's been coming up a lot more so. Something we haven't seen here talked about is also a lot of carbon credits or carbon sequestration. There's another big one that's in today's world. So yeah, that's good stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. And maintain forest health. Most folks answered with that as something that's really important to them. Beauty and wildlife. And absolutely, basically almost every management technique you can do, there's no need to sacrifice forest health. It's gonna impact everything else. So that's great. Thanks for sharing, everybody.
Mhm.
Oh, am I still on the right screen for everyone? Just checking. Do you
I
still
can still see your PowerPoint.
Oh, great. Okay. All right. So thanks for that. These questions were all derived from that document that I put in the chat. And I gave that to you all because this is a helpful thing to really rank your priorities. And it goes into much more detail than those polls. So it actually asks you to number things from 1 to 9, 1 to 7, whatever it is. Because most of you have multiple areas of interest or multiple goals to layer, but being able to prioritize and really see where your priorities lie will help you figure out what kind of things to aim for first. So that helps you communicate what's most important. So just to review some of the things that are possible, and it sounds like a lot of you are already engaging in these sorts of things. But these are things that you can discuss with a professional to help you really amplify what you get the most enjoyment out of, or your goals. So one option is enjoying the woods, and there's many different ways, obviously, to do that. Whether that's everything from bird watching to hiking to hobby maple syrup or even foraging. But obviously the management possibilities for each of these things look quite different. Whether you're managing for birds versus wildlife or for both, which is something that's very possible in Northeast Ohio woods. Obviously the recreational foraging, which is something that we have amongst us today. By the way, and each one of these topics can be its own entire sort of lesson or lecture, but this just gives you an idea of how each activity is linked to a particular management possibility. And also noteworthy, this was mentioned briefly in the previous question and answer, but there are landowner assistance programs for a lot of things that touch on conservation activities, whether that be through NRCS or other landowner assistance programs. So if your enjoyment goals can also be accomplished by the creation of habitat or biodiversity, or hit some of the conservation concerns in our state, there may be funding available to help you do that. Here's another piece of that worksheet, just in a little bit more detail, to show you how specific management can get, especially when you're thinking even just about wildlife. So if you were to say to Dan or to Luke when they come out to your property, I want to manage for wildlife, they'd probably say, what kind of wildlife? Because there are a lot of different management techniques, because every animal, every bird is different in what they like. From the ecological perspective, and I'll just go ahead and soapbox for a second, a healthy forest is a biodiverse forest, is one that can support a lot of different species. You don't necessarily have to think just about wild turkey or just about that big prize winning book that you want to get. There's a lot of measures that can be taken that can benefit a lot of different species. So having said that, I just wanted to sort of cover. Oh, and I wanted to throw this picture in here because I just heard a little while ago about some landowners who are managing their forest for pollinators, which is something that is overlooked sometimes. I thought that was really cool. And again, it hits multiple objectives because pollinators use flowering trees. They also use meadow plants. So this landowner did a lot of extensive edge restoration, old field restoration, as well as some work on invasive species in their forest to promote forest herbs and flowering plants and keep their flowering trees healthy. So I thought that was cool.
Yeah, when it comes to having a goal, what you want to do with the woodlands, it could be as abstract or wild as, I want to manage my woodlands just for raptors, for large birds of prey in the area. And there's ways to do that by creating flying corridors, large perches, pretty similar to the way we actually manage for cerulean warbler. There's a lot of different things. So I mean, just because you think it's an idea, if you think it's, impossible or out of the way, it may not be. So,
Sky's the limit.
mhm.
Great.
Can't say that enough.
Yeah, that's great. Obviously, this was a big part of Dan's presentation, but you can profit from the woods. And what I want to stress here is that, as we've been saying over and over again, timber profit, even timber profit, often can overlap with other concerns or goals that you have. So the important thing is to call that professional forester, make sure you communicate your goals, and know that you can be harvesting timber and getting multiple different benefits from it, not just an economic one. And this could be a long-term goal, meaning like you do a pre-commercial or thinning cut with the goal of eventually, later down the road, harvesting those trees. Or it could be the idea that you're going to do, single tree selection over the course of a few decades. So it doesn't have to mean cutting all of your merchantable timber at once. It doesn't even have to mean cutting trees necessarily. And that's where NTFPs or non-timber forest products come into play. And up in this neck of the woods, that often means maple syrup. Although I know of folks who also cultivate mushrooms. We've started to demonstrate that over at Working Woods at Holden's property. And even, selective harvesting and selling of things like other goods from the woods, like ramps or specialty wood products, even selling firewood. There are all ways to generate a little bit of income. And then I won't cover this in detail, but either of the other presenters can jump in on the tax assistance considerations, OFTL, CAUV. These are things that you can apply for if you are actually making or plan to make an income from your woods.
I'll jump in there for just a moment and I really want to hammer home that even timber harvesting, even managing your woods for timber can be done along with almost all of the other goals that landowners have. Short of preservation and leaving it alone, it's part of the equation. Timber harvest doesn't mean the portable band mill that comes in and takes everything that could be used to make a 2x4. Most of the time, my sales average 10 trees to the acre. That's very different. If the tops weren't left in place to replenish the soil, you most of the time wouldn't know that the harvest even took place.
Mhm.
And tax assistance, keep in mind that your situation may change. Your situation will change over time. And your ability to even pay taxes may change. I know of a particular property where landowners entered into a conservation easement with Western Reserve and gave up their right to sell timber. They no longer qualify for either of the property tax reduction programs. They moved on in years, they retired, and suddenly they faced the decision of selling the property because they could no longer afford the full rate property taxes. So, keep in mind, things change. The timber tax programs are out there, but they're out there for people that are actively growing a commercial crop. Doesn't mean they're cutting trees today, just that means they're growing a commercial crop for some future purpose.
Thanks, Dan. It's an important point.
Yeah, that's a great point, and just kind of follow up on that. And we haven't discussed it quite yet, and I don't think today, maybe we were or get into it, but difference between conservation and preservation are very, very different.
Yeah, that's a good thing to point out for
They're
sure.
very, very different things. Everything that we've discussed right now is all conservation, and it's all a good thing for your woodland and for the environment. Preservation pretty much is hands off, no touchy deal. That doesn't mean you're doing the best thing for the woodland. In any instance, I mean, it's okay to have. I'm not dissing preservation at all. I'm just, you need to really consider you know, what you want to do and get out of it, because just preservation alone, it probably won't take care of itself and meet your goals as well as you might hope, if those goals include, you know, wildlife and different things. So, yeah, I just wanted to throw that in there. So
That's great, thank you. And I wish I had some some pictures on here of an example of the no touchy sort of preservation attitude in different types of forests, because you can see that all over the landscape in Ohio. What happens when a landowner has chosen to do nothing? And at certain stages of a forest's life or a garden's life, if you're thinking in Dan's metaphorical terms, doing nothing is probably not the best or healthiest way to interact with the forest. Also, something important to think about is that we pretty much only exclusively have at least second growth forests in Ohio. So somebody made an impact on that forest sometime. And usually that past impact was the land use of agriculture.
Yeah.
So though the woods have grown back and reached, you know, stability, there's still some sort of impact. And especially because we have tons of edge, you know, where we have modified the landscape, whether that's farming or development, that's impacting the forest. So we have an impact on the forest, whether we like it or not. And yeah.
even prior to the English settlement, there was Native Americans did manipulate woodlands. Some might not have all been through, you know, large harvesting and stuff that we do today, but a lot of prescribed fire or burning of underbrush to, so they could see enemies coming, and also manipulating the forest to grow products that either benefited them or wildlife that they did was something they also did. So there's been a lot of manipulation of woodlands throughout centuries. So it's something that I feel we should consider and keep doing today. So.
Yeah. And it can be an empowering thing, because then you can start to think of yourself as a part of the woods versus like apart from the woods.
Yes. Become a steward.
Yeah, become a steward, because, you know, we're human animals, we're creatures on the landscape doing things that impact our landscape and taking goods from it. Moving along, the goal, and we've touched on this many times, to harvesting timber, doing your foraging thing, non-timber forest products, doing all those things doesn't mean that you have to sacrifice health. You can always keep the woods healthy and meet a lot of other goals. And the benefits of keeping that at the center of your, of sort of your mindset around things is that generally improving forest integrity or health can lead to improving other aspects of the woods or helping benefit other goals that you might have. So some questions that you might want to ask in this vein are you aware of pests and diseases and other threats that could be in your woods? Sort of, do you know what you have? So someone asked about beech leaf disease. One of the first things is, can you identify the trees in your woodland? Are you aware of the pests and diseases that might affect those trees? Are there invasive plants in your woods? Do you hope to boost biodiversity or address some of those issues? So those are all some of the questions that can come into your mind when it comes to health, which it seems like in this group is a really important thing. Yeah. And that harkens back to that climate change question as well, because when it comes to a very complex and wicked problem like climate change, where there isn't necessarily one silver bullet solution, one of the best things that we can do is manage for the overall resilience of the whole system. So that idea of forest integrity, having a forest that's healthy at all of its different levels, from the soil to the seedlings, all the way up to the large trees, and then all of the other biotic elements, is important. And that's something just to keep in mind, to continually learn about. Again, you don't have to be an expert, but yeah.
Yeah, and also, you may have a woodland, if you have 100 acres, you don't have to do everything on every part of that property.
That's right.
Portions for timber, portions for young habitat, portions for wildlife, portions for, salamanders. Many different options depending on the size of the woodland to really determine what you can do in certain areas. And have different pockets to do different things and different techniques. So keep that in mind as well.
For sure. And probably you've got a couple different characteristics or past land uses represented on that acreage, unless it's been basically managed the same throughout time. But here are just some ideas for different types of forests. So thinking about what you have and what you can do. And this is just ideas and suggestions. So we mentioned the difference between conservation and preservation. The one time where preservation might be a little more appropriate is if you have a really healthy old forest. So for example, at Holden Arboretum, we steward, I mentioned before, Stebbins Gulch, which is, I think, listed as a national natural landmark. And it's a really cool environment. The timber in there probably was never cut. It's got a lot of cool rare species. We only open it up to the public for like specific tours because we want to have a minimum impact in there. Having said that, we make sure that we keep an eye open for emerging pests and pathogens. We do occasionally, do invasive species treatment. So that's an example of a pretty active preservation stance. So just a couple other things for woods with little or no regeneration. There's probably a reason that that's happening. And you can kind of ask yourself these critical questions. Is it because I have a lot of deer? Is it because there's something going on past land use wise that is not allowing things to take root? Why always determines what. And then we covered a little bit about pre-commercial cuts and improvement cuts. And if you have the condition that I've pictured here on the lower right-hand corner, this is a woods that is dominant red maple and tulip poplar, a very young monoculture stand, very low diversity, and it was very, very heavily invaded. So you can see on the left-hand side of that picture is a carpet of multiflora rose, and on the right-hand side, that's been treated. The invasive management has happened. And it's hard to see in that photo, but there are things starting to regenerate. So the reason there was no regeneration in here, at least not a lot of biodiverse regeneration, was twofold. There's probably multifold, but one of the big things was that things were being suppressed by invasives, but then also most of the seed was coming from windblown species. So we did a combination of things in here in working woods where a thinning cut selected out some of the unhealthy red maples and tulip poplars, things that we already had a lot of, and emphasized releasing some more elements of diversity. So some of the hickories, some of the oaks, even some of the cherries that we have. And then we did some invasive management, and we're starting to see a little bit of recruitment. So basically, it helps to know your options, but it also helps to know your limits. So the end of that worksheet takes you into a little bit of existential searching as a landowner and thinking about what are your limitations when it comes to managing, thinking through what your property history might be, and then some of your management philosophy and outstanding features of your property. So when we're talking management constraints, it's worthwhile to spend a little while thinking about what's practical and feasible on your land. If you really want to be a hobby maple sugar producer, but you don't have any sugar maples, then you might want to purchase a different property. But it helps to find what you have and work with what you have, and celebrate that. And this is just basically figuring out what materials you have before you build the house, thinking in terms of money, time, physical limitations. Some people can actually cut their timber themselves. I have a coworker who periodically will harvest 1 or 2 trees, send them off. He works with someone who's got some equipment. He sends it off to the mill. He gets that same tree back in board footage, and he does some woodworking from it. So that's his level. And other people might be at a different level and want professionals to come do that sort of stuff for them. Land use history and constraints. So this is just something I'll briefly cover. I have this picture on here because I thought it was kind of cool. This was an area of a very young woods, about 60-year-old woods, where there was nothing growing in the understory except for an area where this little trillium was growing next to some old farm equipment. It offered enough shelter that it was able to grow without being browsed. So it's just an interesting interaction between what humans have done on the landscape and what's possible today, what's growing today. So we actually just covered this, so I'm gonna skip beyond it. Obviously, if you have something really cool on your property, that will come into your management plan as well. It can be really personal. If you have a place that's, I don't know, dominated by hemlock, like a stream with hemlock near it, you may not want, and you really enjoy going there for its peaceful qualities. That's probably a place you would want to exclude from a harvest or think about managing in a special way. And then finally, figuring out your own management philosophy. What are you willing to do? And once you figure out your priorities, you may figure out how to adjust your management philosophy. And then obviously, unlike a garden, what happens in a forest is decades to 50 years, 100 years, centuries long sorts of things. So legacy is an important piece of land ownership as well, and thinking of the future. And if you want to, how you want to transfer your land eventually, and how you want to pass that on. So to bring it all together, I know we're almost to the end of our time and I want to open up for questions. These are just ways to figure out all your different management concerns, your priorities, how they complement each other or how they conflict, and figure that out. So where you go from here is I encourage you to work with that worksheet if it's helpful for you. And if you do decide to speak to a professional, a woodland management plan or a land management plan is sort of the next step to really formalize your objectives and know what to do when. But again, can't emphasize it enough. It's your land and it's your objectives, and that's what's important. So thanks to everybody who helped with this presentation, particularly everybody on the call, plus Jamie Dahl, who provided some of the content for this presentation. And that's it. I kind of whipped through that last bit, but I knew that we wanted to.
Yes, so we did have a couple of questions, but we don't have a lot of time. So I'll say it. Someone asked about multiflora rose control options. We did a Wicked Weeds, one of these a couple months back, and there's a link on Geauga Soil and Water's website. So everything you want to know about controlling multiflora rose, you can find there. Someone did ask about ginseng, if that is here in Northeast Ohio.
Yes, but not a lot of it. And it is protected in a lot of areas. So obviously when you harvest ginseng, you're harvesting the whole plant. So there is a conservation and resource concern there. Also whose land you're foraging on. So I will put that out there. Having said that, places such as like Rural Action down in Southern Ohio, they actually have sales to landowners where they actually provide rootstock and seed for ginseng. So if you're interested in something like cultivating that on your own, you can check out Rural Action.
Okay. Someone had asked, I'd left this one off, what we should do to replace the beech we're losing, if anything.
It probably depends on the woods. If you have elements of diversity already in the woods, like oak or other nut or mast, mast means a lot of reproductive material all at once. Those are the trees that would be great to replace beech because they perform a lot of the same ecological functions. If you only have a beech wood, like Luke was saying, you're probably going to get more beech trees if you were to take them out. So it probably depends. From the restoration perspective, we are experimenting with some of the blight resistant chestnut, but that is not a silver bullet for sure.
Yeah, and I think the important thing is, each site's going to be different. So what will work for your site's going to be very specific to your property. So Someone asked about spotted lanternfly. Should we be concerned about that here in Northeast Ohio?
Probably not quite yet. Likelihood of it getting here, it's just a matter of time. If they spotted it in Jefferson County and counties south of us, south of the Northeast, so East Central is where it's been found. Hopefully it stays out of here and hopefully we can monitor and get rid of it and control. But right now, no, I think we have other pressing matters such as disease, oak wilt, and other issues that we have currently than the spotted lanternfly.
Yeah, and one thing you can do to help, it needs tree of heaven, which is an invasive species, as its host. So controlling your invasive species will help keep that out of here. So keep that in mind. Someone asked about poison ivy. A couple people did. Managing for poison ivy, getting rid of poison ivy, and what do you do if you have a lot of poison ivy?
I'll
I
take
think
that one.
Go ahead.
You know, there's a couple different ways to manage for it. If it's vines growing tall in the tree, simply by severing the vine, cutting the vine down low. I don't recommend necessarily chainsaw work for this because you'll get the dust everywhere and probably end up with poison ivy. But a simple handsaw or hatchet to just cut the poison ivy and try not to cut the tree will kill everything from there up. Poison ivy control on the ground or in, I'll say from the hatchet mark down, tends to be herbicide work. That herbicide really is one of the most effective ways of controlling poison ivy at that point.
A quick note on poison ivy, even though it's very hindering to us as a people, it really sucks. I get it all the time. It sucks the forester, but you know, part of the job. But anyway, as management wise, when it grows on the side of the trees, it typically does not harm the trees that much, if any. It does not overtop them like grapevine does. It is native to this area. It does have wildlife benefit. So keep that in mind as well. Other than it bothering you, it really isn't too bad on the woodland unless it's completely matted across your forest floor. And then, yeah, you do want to control it because even native plants can become issues. So.
Thanks. I think that's all the questions that we've got.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everybody for joining us tonight on this glorious evening. Thanks for being here. And thank you so much, Dan, Luke, and Jessica, for a really informative and fun program. Again, you guys will receive an email, a follow-up email with the resources, the survey, and the recording link. And you can always visit geaugaswcd.com, and we have a tab at the top that's past events and resources, and we'll be linking those up there as soon as they become available in the next day or so. So enjoy our wonderful spring, and thank you everybody for being here tonight.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Gail. Thanks, everyone.
Sure.
Take care.
Bye-bye.